Hi, I'm KS Garner, and you're listening to the Solo Nerdbird podcast. Today, I'll be speaking with the writer and creator of the comic Awakening, Ari Gross, here to promote the comics Kickstarter. Welcome, Ari.
Hey everyone. Hey there. Thanks for having me on.
Well, thank you for joining us today. Thanks for reaching out. But outside my introduction, who is Ari Gross in his own words?
Who is Ari Gross? Ari Gross is, I guess, based on behind me, a comic junkie. First and foremost, but also I'm a writer out of Toronto. I have a day job. I've started writing about a couple years ago, and I've just gotten deep into comic writing. Something I've wanted to do for a real long time. And just shortly after the pandemic, I ran out of excuses to start writing, the story that just sits in your head and drives you crazy until you get it out. And so that's kind of what I do. It's funny because I think of myself as having a lot of agency as a writer, like trying to craft things, but a lot of the time it's just sort of, it comes to you and your job is to like make it the best of what it's going to be, but there's already a kernel or a grain of something. It's very weird. It's almost like channeling something rather than like creating. It's a weird sort of experience, but I've heard a lot of writers speak about it in similar ways. Maybe
Yeah.
that's getting too deep right off the bat, but
No. I completely understand being a writer, author myself. I feel like it's almost like you have an obligation to kind of get it out and write it down and give it out to people and let them read it and consume it. And with a lot of my characters, I feel like they tell me what they want to happen in the scene, like even down to how like they look, their hairstyle, the way their clothes look and whatnot. And I feel like that sets the scene, even if I don't know where it's going in a way, they like kind of
mm,
lead me to where it's gonna go in a way. So
yeah,
that's how I
once you
try to
get
describe my writing.
Yeah, absolutely. If you have a strong idea of what the characters are, like they'll almost write themselves. If you put them in a situation or like this is the oppositional conservative one or whatever, and this is the like trying to keep it nice together, appease everybody. Like if you know that, then and you know what they're talking about and what kind of vaguely what the scene's about, like it'll flow. And then you'll have to like edit it 4 billion times because I'm one of those guys who edits things 4 billion times. But
Yeah. When I edit, I'll kind of like stop halfway through and then leave it alone for a long time, and then I'll come back to it. But then I don't start where I left all of that. I start back over again, and then
right,
do it like
like going
that.
back and then yeah, that's a good strategy. I just got some stuff back from my editor, which is not related to Awakening, and a lot of it was like this writing sounds like a '90s sitcom,. Like basically do better. And I was like, yeah, that's fair enough. But in order to do that, I have to ask myself, okay, so why are they sounding like this? It's like, okay, because the guy's sounding real sarcastic all the time. But maybe that's not who he is. Maybe he's in a, maybe if you sort of rethink about how, reconfigure sort of his outlook, or maybe he is being sarcastic, but it doesn't have to be responded to in the same sort of snappy dialogue kind of way. If because the person he's talking to isn't sarcastic or whatever it is. Anyway, it's I've been thinking a lot about wordsmithing recently, just because just getting something back, and like that's where my head's been at for the past day or so. In addition to the Kickstarter campaign, which is where like most of my head's at, kind of all the time, or at least since the last week, and all the time leading up to that in the last month or two.
Uh-huh. So back to Awakening. So what is Awakening actually about?
Right. So Awakening is a sci-fi story. It's a self-contained one shot. It's not the beginning of a series. Never say never, but I didn't write it as if it's an ongoing story. I read it with beginning, middle, and an end. Excuse me. It's about I mean, it's very Star Trek. It's based on it's like it takes its inspiration heavily from Star Trek. That if you start reading it, flipping through, you can see if you're at all familiar with Star Trek, you sort of know who these people kind of are, not necessarily the characters, but the relation to the ship. Like this person's the security officer, that person's the captain, this person's the navigator, or whatever. And it starts off with this the starship exploring an unexplored galaxy. It's at the edge of it. It's trying to figure out the celestial anomaly, the strange multicolored ball. And Lieutenant Lau, the main character that will follow through, he's affected by this somehow, or maybe not by the anomaly, but he's affected somehow. And he starts seeing things that no one else can really see. He starts making claims that everyone else kind of thinks he's nuts about. And he gets taken off to the med bay. There's a debate of where should he go to the med bay? Should he go to the brig? Is this a security thing? Is this a medical thing? And then it sort of goes deeper into what is the nature of his affection. Is it something that is real? Is it not real? How does it affect the rest of the crew or not affect them? And I don't want to give too much away because I do think it's pretty fun. It's a little twisty. I really enjoy doing the ending of it. But yeah, I want to structure it almost like a classic Star Trek episode where people are looking at a thing, someone's acting weird, and like, what is that all about?
Mm-hmm. So you said earlier about how you started working on your comics pretty much a little bit after lockdown, or I should say 2020,
Yeah,
because it's pretty much that's all you could do at the time. So could you elaborate on your creative process for Awakening pretty much as a whole? So say like you had this idea in your head, you finally had the time to expand on it, right? And then now working on it as complete work because you're not planning on expanding it, but you never know what happens in the future, to now promoting it on Kickstarter.
sure. Actually, very early on, I'll just walk you through my sort of comic history because it's not super long, given it's only about 2 years and change or so.
Uh-huh.
Although coming up on 3, so I'm feeling good about that. Basically, for the first year, there's a different story that I had in my head, which is becoming an ongoing series. I'm getting the art back for issue number 1 right now. I'm really excited about that. That's called Wardens. It deals with a supernatural crime story in Toronto in the 1920s in an immigrant community. It's called The Ward. That's St. John's Ward. And anyway, I had the story in my head and it was like very, very clear. The characters were like super, super clear. And I was like, I got to write this. I got to write this. Like, this is like, it was living in my head for like 2 years before that. And I was like, finally, I'm out of excuses. I got to write it down. So I did that for about a year. I just wrote for a year, didn't learn anything about like really proper comic writing, just sort of like learned a little bit about how to, how many pages or how many panels should there be in a page, like how many words per panel, like super, super basic stuff, and just started writing. And I was like, I just got to get this out of my head. So a year later, I finished it. I was like, I have a story. It's basically 12 issues, maxi series. And I was going around and people be like, great, what do I do now? How do I turn this into a story? And everyone said the same thing. They're like, you want to turn like 264 pages into like a comic, like right away. Like, just don't. Like, pick 4 pages of a story. Like, make a 5-6 page story. Do a 1-page story, which is, of course, excellent advice. Before you do the big thing that you care a lot about, do a few small things so you understand how the thing works. Like, just learn how to make comics, because it's not the same as writing prose. It's not the same as screenwriting. Not that I really know how to do either of those things. It's its own special thing, So I did a lot of shorts. I did about 8 shorts, and with the hope of doing a single issue, and then doing sort of an ongoing continuous series, because I didn't want my first single issue to be like issue 1 of the thing that I like it's my dream project, make or break. Like, I wanted to like learn the mechanics, understand how to make a thing, and I don't mean to say this diminishing Awakening. It's a separate story and a self-contained, which is why it works well as a one-shot rather than an ongoing, So what was I saying? Oh yeah, so the story Awakening just kind of came to me pretty clearly. Like, I can't say when or something, but maybe about a year and a half ago. The basic idea, the basic structure of it came to me. I was like, okay, that's cool. So now I had to sit down, flesh out the characters. One of the hardest part was finding an artist, because you want an artist that is like can sort of match your vision. And also this time I was like, want someone that can, like, as always, you want someone that was like, match your vision, match your budget, match the style that you're looking for, and be a good person to work with. And I found someone who was all those things. His name's Greg Warrenchuk. He's out of Ottawa, also in Canada. And he's just like the friendliest guy in the world and the nicest guy, which is great because I'm a super picky writer. When I get art back, I'm just like, man, maybe you can. Like, and if there's something's like slightly inconsistent, I'm always like, but he's real great to work with. And so, yeah, I mean, pretty much after that, it's like, you have your writer, or so you have your artist, you start doing pages, and then, the rest sort of falls into place. You get a colorist, you get a letterer. I'm just starting to learn how to do my own letters now. So maybe in the future, I'll be lettering my own stuff. But if nothing else, I'll like understand the process. So if I, like just know how it works, right? That's always good to know. And yeah, I think the hardest part about Awakening was transitioning it from a comic, which I felt kind of confident at that point because I made some shorts. I'm like, I can make a story, I can make a comic, I can make sequential art, beginning to end. Here we go. To turn that into a Kickstarter campaign, because that's the new thing for me here. This is my first Kickstarter campaign. I had been part of other Kickstarter campaigns, 3 successfully funded anthologies. The first one is here. It's Tales from the Cloakroom. That has a 6-page story I had in it. That came out of Scott Snyder's, Scott Snyder's comic class, which actually I should mention that. So early on, as a whim, I signed up, or about a year and a half ago, I signed up for this class that Scott Snyder put out. Scott Snyder, of course, is like Batman fame amongst many other things, and he's doing a lot of indie stuff right now, like for Image or Comixology, and it's all really good. He put out this class, and a bunch of us just joined right away. I think it was like 1,000 people or something, like off the bat. One of those, like, person says, "I'll do a thing," and then everyone's interested. But a small subset of us were like, "Hey, maybe we should make an anthology. Like, maybe we should just do a comic while we're taking the class," which was great. And we had 4 people decide to become editors, and a bunch of us. I can't remember how many stories there are in there. I think there's like about 20, not quite 20. It's probably going to turn out there's like 12 or something that I totally forgot and miscounted, but between 10 and 20, I'll put it that way. And so I have a 6-page story in there, which I'm actually including in this for Awakening, because it goes very well with the first story, and you'll sort of see that as you go through. All this to say is I sort of had been part of the Kickstarter experience, I've been part of the crowdfunding experience, but I wanted to try to do it myself and see, what it actually means to like launch a campaign from beginning to end. And also see if if it works, is this the kind of thing you want to do again, or you can do again? Or is this just like too much of a terrible mental headache and no one should ever do it again? And maybe you just want to like try real hard to like get someone to pick up, the ongoing series. So I guess we'll find out when this is done, if it's something I would consider. It's definitely a lot of work. Yeah.
Yeah, so it kind of sounds like to me, like when you first started, you wrote this huge thing that you wanted to, like over 200 pages that you wanted to turn into a comic. And then you asked for other people's advice, and it was like, no, do like, a couple of pages or 1-page type of thing. And then you went on and did a bunch of shorts, and then, anthologies and whatnot, took some classes. And then you do Awakening, and you're now doing, it was the Wardens, right? Is the one that's you turning into a series, right? So it's kind of like, I guess you learned as you went along. And how hard was it actually like starting in a way? Because I know you said you've been putting off for a long time, and I'm asking that because a lot of people have these ideas, and there's these huge ideas that they have, and they have like multiple chapters, multiple series and whatnot, but then a lot of them are afraid to start because they're afraid of failing, or it's not good enough. And you wrote this huge thing, and all people were like, no, pretty much right off the bat. So like, how afraid were you of starting, and how did it feel to receive that feedback, the critique from people when you initially shared pretty much your first work?
Yeah. I always find starting stuff kind of easy, because I just sort of like jump in there and don't really worry if it's good, I guess. Just try to I had a very strong idea for Wardens, like what the main, say first, the main 6 characters were going to be. Mm-hmm. I was like, I know who these people are. I know what they're driven by. I know their motivations. Like once I had that, and then it's a question of plot, where do you set up? And I wrote a bunch of pages in the beginning that I've later, since torn out, they're walking through the town and doing stuff. And I'm like, boring. Nobody cares. Like, move on, just kind of you can character. Well, I heard the other day someone was saying, I think it was Shelley Barn. I'm taking her class on comic editing. She's was an editor for Vertigo for many years. And still is a comic editor, just not for Vertigo, because Vertigo doesn't exist. And she was saying, was action is character, which I thought was a real great line. Is that, instead of having just 2 people talking, show them doing something which expresses, who they are, rather than just saying. It's the classic, show, don't tell, right? Someone's like, oh, I'm a big tough guy. You better show them being a big tough guy. Otherwise, we don't actually know they're a big tough guy, But yeah, starting I found pretty, I always found it easy to start, but I do find it hard to move on from a page if it's not perfect. I'm one of those people who's, I think Kurt Vonnegut once described all writers as grinders or flyers. Flyers are people, he said, that can just write like garbage, but you're done, and then you go back and you edit it 1,000 times. Where grinders are people who they want to make sure it's really good before you move on. And that's my instinct, but I have to keep punching that instinct in the face, because that is not the way to get anything done if you want to tell a bigger story. At least it's very hard to you know, to like, you really just gotta like, you know, if you have an outline or something like that, and then you can go down into the pages, like you have to have the broad story before you have the micro. And once you start fiddling, because you can get so in depth and fiddling with like someone's trying to make a joke, so you're like spending it, you know, forever crafting this joke, and then it's a great joke, but then you cut the whole scene because, you know, it just doesn't fit, because you realize 4 pages later, like, yeah, why do I even have this thing here? You know, so like you don't want to spend your time writing stuff that you will eventually get cut. So it's a lot of it was like understanding how to write long form creatively, which is something that's fairly new to me. I've done a lot of academic writing. I have a sort of an academic background of, so like I'm, you know, I can write like a 300-page like dissertation on like super obscure stuff that nobody cares about, but like writing characters that people want to hang out with for like an afternoon, like that was new, you know. And getting the feedback from everyone, it's always tough when someone's like, hey, you did a thing, don't do that right away, you know. It's because you're really excited, you're amped. But I've been trying to take a super long-term perspective for all this. Like everything will come when it's ready. So like wardens will be published when it's ready, and when I actually know how to do a very good job of that, because I'd rather make my mistakes on a 4-pager that, you know, like no one's really going to care too much about than a, you know, like an ongoing series, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, it's always hard to get feedback. Some, you know, even like now I got feedback from my editor, and she's like, you know, this dialogue is terrible, you know, like just make it better. And I was just like, I spent so long on that dialogue, and then you read and you're like, she's right, it's garbage. Like I could do so much better than this. Like, thank you for pointing out that like this is not my best work. And we've worked together for a while. This editor, by the way, I should mention, is Aubrey Lynn Jepson. She was one of the editors for the Tales from the Cloakroom anthology, and she's been my editor pretty much for everything that I've done. And she's also the letterer for Awakening as well. So if you like the letters, she's one of those people who's like trying to do everything. She's now taken a coloring class, and I was like, okay, that's a lot. Like, you're learning how to do it all. You're going to be like an amazing solo comic creator, or you're going to burn yourself out terribly, or maybe both. So we'll see.
Well, I mean, I've actually interviewed Aubrey and Chris for
yeah,
for the Tales from the Cloakroom a while back.
That's right.
And,
yeah.
Well, speaking of collaborators and them, I should say, sorry. How was the process of collaborating with other creators? You know, Aubrey, Carlos, Greg, Phil, that did the cover art for, you know, on Awakening. You know, some of them you work with on anthologies, but how did it differ working on your own story?
I think the biggest difference was, for my own story, even though Aubrey is the editor, I kind of like, the buck stops here with me for every like last decision. So if something was a little off for the anthology, she and Chris and the other editors would see it and say, hey, this needs to be fixed. You know, and they did the work of getting all the trade press together, like of actually creating the physical comic, of, you know, putting all the pages out and InDesign and all that stuff. And for Awakening, it was me. I was like, I want to do this. I want to know how it's done, soup to nuts, like just how to make a comic straight up, you know? Mm-hmm. And you just learn a lot more about the work. You know, you learn a lot about the details of, you know, like, oh, I have this page I got back from a person. Oh, it's not like according, like it's not according to, like, it's not spec properly, you know, like it's too big or it's too small, or it's like slightly. That was the thing for Awakening. I didn't send Greg like exactly the right template. I sent him something that was like slightly off, and so it was a lot of like me fiddling with things afterwards, like you know, just to get things like super perfect. But yeah, I mean, if you do everything yourself, you learn a ton. And I wouldn't recommend that everyone does everything themselves the whole time, but I strongly recommend that anyone who's trying to make comics does at least one thing all themselves, because then you learn, or at least like very closely working with somebody else. I don't mean like excuse me, all the art yourself if you can't do art, or the letters if you can't do the letters, but the production of creating and putting it all together is super eye-opening and instructive. And you realize like a lot of the decisions are just very technical decisions, and if you make the wrong technical decision early on, it can screw you up completely by the end. So, you know, make the right one, and make sure that everyone on your team is making the right technical decisions as well.
Uh-huh. So throughout the whole process of making Awakening, it doesn't even have to be Awakening. It can be, the stuff you wrote before, the shorts you've done, even working on Wardens right now, or I don't know, maybe you've been working on a bunch of stuff simultaneously, right? Do you or did you ever get overwhelmed? Does it ever become too much? And how do you typically manage your mental well-being when it does?
So in terms of creating stuff, because there's no one breathing down my neck with a deadline, it's a lot easier than if I had if I were like working for Marvel or something, and they're like, "Where's the pages at?" Like, come on, like we needed them yesterday, something like that. So I can take the time and spend the creative effort, to really get things right. Being overwhelmed mentally is definitely something that I've been getting with Awakening, largely just because of the Kickstarter campaign, because this is the big new thing for me. This is the thing that's like, it's going to make or break the comic if it succeeds. So like, there's something on the line where before it's like, does this little short have the perfect coloring, or is it coloring kind of good enough? Or is it, they did it slightly and we're going to have a little bit of a back and forth, but maybe I don't get it the way I want, and maybe I get it, maybe it's even better. Like, that stuff is sort of part of the normal process, at least the normal, like the process that, because I've done it a few times and now I'm more used to it. The first few times when, you ask an artist to change something as a writer, you're like, oh gosh, can I even ask someone to do something? Like, I don't know. Should I give them more money? Should I give them a raise? Like, I don't know what to do, but you learn as the process goes on, sort of, what is a reasonable ask and what is an unreasonable ask. And they'll let you know if you say something like that's just way out of left field. And, they'll also let you know if you ask something totally reasonable. So understanding socially, sort of the bound, I don't mean socially as in like, being nice to everyone, because I make an extreme point of being like super nice, paying everybody on time. Like, you don't want to be that guy nobody wants to work with. And I don't want to work with anyone who's that guy that nobody wants to work with. I mean, a huge part of making comics is the collaborative nature of it. I mean, no one just does it. Very few people do it just themselves. And so if you're someone like me who can't do art, then, you need to work with other people. So you just need to be good, because otherwise you're going to have a bad time. And you also learn who you want to work with and who you don't in the future. Like, I had this one person who was a great artist, like just one of my favorite artists that I work with, but he cannot meet a deadline. And it's like, I was considering him for another longer series, but I can't do that, because if he can't meet a deadline for a short, then I don't trust him for, like a 24 pager, right? So just understanding, the process and the collaborative nature is hugely important.
Well, with something like that, when you're working with someone like that, how did you, I guess, deal with that? Like, have you ever dealt with someone like that who didn't meet deadlines? Because it disrupts everything else. It disrupts pretty much the process of everything else, because you have to make the adjustments because this person didn't meet the specific deadline that you set. So like, say, because I've talked to other people where they've had like, artists who drew them something and they didn't like it, but they still have to pay them for it, right? Or writer, editor who, they gave them something again and they didn't like it, but they had to pay them for it. So you worked with this guy and you were considering working with him again, but you can't because their time management is really poor, but you still have to pay them and still be professional and work with them on this specific project that you were working on at the time. So how did you deal with like working with this particular person, even though you kind of didn't want to anymore?
Yeah, the thing is, I really wanted to continue working with them, but just give me the art.
Yeah.
It's like, dude, you're great. Like, just do it though. Like, I know you have, if there's something that comes up, let me know. And that's the thing, is communication is just the most important thing. If someone's like, I have this family emergency, I can't do things for the next 5 days. It's like, cool, thanks. I'm going to take that mental note. 5 days from now, I'm going to follow up and then ask you, or whatever it is. Right. But people start flaking out on you, then it's like, this is just super unprofessional, and that's not something I can deal with. I guess, a lot of just like polite nudging. You have to know who you're working with. Sometimes people need a polite nudge. Sometimes they need a slightly less polite nudge. And sometimes they need you to like get them off the project.
Mm-hmm.
All my contracts, since the very first contract. So everyone I work with, every I should say artist, usually not colorist because I kind of haven't needed to, but for the primary artists, I have everyone have a contract, and in that contract is it a clause that talks about I forget the term, an escape clause, a quit clause. One of us wants to pull the plug on this thing for whatever reason, and there's a specific like, here's how that's going to go. So everyone knows that if for whatever reason this isn't working, here's how here's how it works with the money. Here's how it works with the with the responsibilities and whatever. And I won't go into the details with you necessarily. You don't need to know them, but like it's in there, and so like it's something that I've thought of ahead of time, and you just kind of have to have in there. There's my very first comic that I had, or one of the very first ones, not the first one done, but the first one that I wrote. I had someone start art on it, and I just couldn't. He was giving me some of the character sketches, and they were like not exactly what I wanted, but I found maybe I could work through it. And then the first page came, and I was like, oh, this page isn't very good. Like the art style is just not up to, like the art quality wasn't up to it, and the art style wasn't matching. And then by the time I was like, maybe the second page, and the second page came, and I was like, oh no, I can't. This isn't going to work at all. You just know. And so the advice I would give to new creators is you don't let it get to that second page. Like if it's not working out right from the beginning, trust your instinct and be like, thank you. Like you've done work. I respect that. Here is the money that we agreed for it. If you haven't paid them already, goodbye. I have to find someone else for this, because it's just, be as polite as you can. But if it's your project and you know what the project has to be, if the people can't make it that, better you let them know sooner rather than later. And the same thing for me. If someone hired me as a writer and they were, they wanted me to write something, and they wanted me to write in a totally different style or something than the way I write, or something that just wasn't, I wouldn't be the right for it. I'd rather know, shortly into the gig than, halfway through the project, right? Mm-hmm. If it's not working out, it's better to quit and make it work than push something through that just is not going to make anybody happy. Because this is a passion project, and not just a passion project. Like I'm trying to create comics and sell comics and get into the comic business and do ongoing series. Like it's a labor of love, and you can't spend your whole time, dealing. Like it's hard to commit a lot of love to something that is just not going to live up to the quality. So if you have any ability to like determine anything regarding the quality, then you should focus on that. And like you'll have to make some hard calls, but that's just the nature of being in a business just the nature of engaging in just doing this. Like everyone has to make hard calls.
Yeah, I think making those hard calls is probably one of the hardest parts, because a lot of us are introverts and we kind of just want to do the work. We don't want to deal with that part of it. But especially working in indie comics, you kind of have to, because you don't have a whole team of people behind you, or that business part. You kind of have to be the artist and the business person and make that hard call with like, hey, we can't do this anymore. So
yeah, and the introvert thing, it's interesting because I don't typically describe myself as a pure introvert. Like I'm polite, but my instinct is to quietly work on my creative processes, my creative projects, largely alone. With a small number of dedicated people. But I'm not the kind of person who wants to spend all their time on Twitter. I don't like get energy from other people, just like in social media. And so like I've had to become a social media person, or a social media savvy person, where I haven't been on social media since I don't know, quit Facebook like 15 years ago or something like that. Like I did years ago, I was just like, yeah, I can see where this is going. This was like Toronto had a pretty wacky mayor at the time, Rob Ford, who you might remember for famously being caught on video smoking crack, amongst other things. And so like at the time, everyone was like, Rob Ford's a disaster, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, I don't need to like spend my time on Facebook if all I'm going to hear is like how terrible things are. And then like after that, like many more terrible governments happened. So I'm kind of like, oh good, I kind of like ducked out of that one. I don't have to deal with just like negativity that I can't affect positive change for. Like if it was like, here's something bad and you can do something right now to help it, and it's the kind of thing that I would be in a position to do, maybe. But like, I don't know, man, there's a lot of negativity in the world, and creatively I don't get, I have enough enough darkness in my head in the way that I write. I don't need more. You know what I mean? Like I can write the happy, I can write the sad. I don't want it just to be overwhelmingly influenced by purely negative things. So anyway, since I've been on Twitter, I've made a very strong point of generally being super positive. I don't dump on people's work. I don't try to go after anybody. I'm there just to talk about how much I love comics and support the people's work that I like and prop up the people who I'm friends with. And I've kept it very strictly to that, and which, you know, having kind of a rule going into social media has been real useful. And now, like with the campaign, like I've been on there all the time talking about this, talking about that. I've been sending out, you know, like updates. You know, I have a email list as well, like sending out, you know, MailChimp stuff. So it's like way more active than I expected to be because I'm the publicist. You know, I'm the everything. It's my project. No one's selling it but me. So yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Well, my last question for you, Ari, is you've already given like a lot of really good advice, but what advice would you offer to other creators you wish someone would have told you when you first started?
So the first piece of advice I think to any writer is like the one that I was given, I would 100% repeat, is start small, succeed early, like have small successes and small failures, because you don't want to, because if you recognize a problem or a failure coming soon with a small thing, even if that affects everything and the whole thing becomes a failure, it's way less problematic than, you know, your first issue for an ongoing series like not working out, right? I guess the next piece of advice would be trust your instinct very heavily when dealing with people. Like if someone seems super nice and saying all the right things, but then they're not coming through, like, you know, follow what people do and not what they say, you know? I mean, that's like just general advice for life, right? You know, like you should always, like, you know, pay attention to people's actions in addition to their words, but like even more importantly than their words. Like people can be as polite as possible, but if, you know, if it's not working out, then it's not working out. I guess the next advice would be write something that you feel passionate about and that you care about, not necessarily something that is going to be that you think will be popular and other people will care about. You can choose something that is popular, and even if it's not your thing, you can make it your thing, because whatever you care about as a writer, whatever you bring, your personal background, you know, your everything about your person, once you start writing, you're going to bring that to whatever you're dealing with. You know, I'm not going to write a story about I don't know, like I'm not going to like write a, like, let's say zombies are popular. I don't know if they're still popular now. Well, Last of Us is out, so maybe they're popular again. But
Yeah, I think
you
The
know,
Walking Dead is still
is that
right.
still walking? I fell off that
I
train a
think they're
long
doing
time
a
ago. Yeah.
Daryl spinoff. So
Oh,
yeah.
no kidding. Yeah. So if you want to write something popular, let's say you're like, I want to write zombies because zombies is popular. Like, okay, well, what about that speaks to me? You know, you're not just going to do sort of survival for the sake of survival and human tensions. Like Walking Dead's done that. That's pretty good. Or, you know, it's depending on what part of it you ask and who you talk to, whatever, like, you know, they've done it. There's, you know, Train to Busan. Like I just saw that recently for the first time because I'm terrible at watching movies, even though I should have watched them like years ago. You know, great zombie movie, deals with, you know, class issues in South Korea. So like that movie is, you know, nominally about zombies, but mostly about, you know, when things go down, do you look out for yourself? Do you look out for others? And all the other sort of, you know, class-based issues that the writers wanted to put in there. So, I mean, you know, zombies are almost like an environmental thing, an environmental hazard that you have to worry about. You know, you could have told a similar, you know, obviously not the same story, but you could have told similar stories if, you know, people trapped in, excuse me, in, you know, like a plane crash sort of situation, or like, I haven't seen Yellow Jackets, but something like that, you know, a situation where there's an environmental thing and people have to deal and have to survive. But like whatever stories, whatever your spin on it is, whatever you think is the most important, write that, and you're going to be bringing that to whatever you write. I mean, I write a lot about the stuff I know. I write a lot about, you know, my identity, my family. You know, I'm Jewish. My wife is Chinese Canadian, and so, you know, that stuff comes through in Wardens, which I've had an amazing time writing. You know, I focus on the characters in the ward who are, you know, Jewish, Chinese, Black, Italian, Irish immigrants. And so you sort of deal with issues of, you know, like sort of multiculturalism, racism, sexism, class issues, labor issues, like all that stuff I I think it's interesting. I want to dig into, but it's 100 years ago, so there's a bit of distance between us and what's happening, and the way that people use sci-fi or fantasy to talk about typically pressing issues, but put a bit of distance between. Make it accessible to some people who might not want to just jump in and be like deal with the issues just sort of head on. They throw some supernatural stuff in there because it's fun, and you get to play with the ideas and play with the characters in different ways. But it's all based around who you are and the kind of stories you want to say. So trust that instinct, because you're only gonna have a good time writing if you want to write the stuff that you want to write. If you just think something's popular, like vampires are in, let's write vampires. It's like, what do you have to say about vampires? I don't know. Like maybe there's a vampire love triangle. It's like, okay, well, that's not enough for a story. You have to have something you really want to say to make people care about it, because there's a bajillion stories about vampires and there's a bajillion stories about love triangles, and like, what makes yours interesting,
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So is there anything else that you wanted to share about Awakening that we may have missed as a whole? Maybe discuss rewards for potential backers for the Kickstarter?
Yeah, I think that'd be a great thing to mention. So for Awakening, I've got, I forget how many tiers, 5 or 6. One of the hardest parts was deciding what to make the tiers for Kickstarter and not to go overboard. Mm-hmm. So it's my first campaign. I was like, people were like, "You doing variant covers?" I was like, "No, we're doing one cover. I'll do other stuff. Like, variants will come for other things. I'm just trying to like get a thing and put it out there, So we have digital version. We have a physical version plus digital, of course. The next little thing up is a sign plus backer recognition, and then you get a postcard. So this is cool little postcard. This is beach day scene, which if people go to the website, you'll see it's the whole cast hanging out on the beach, and the back of the postcard is from one of the characters to someone else, and you'll find it once you get it. So I did that, and then moving up a tier, I got some stickers, which I designed myself. And you've got some. The next tier up is original sketch. So Greg, our artist, will include he will do a sketch of you and one of the characters of either Awakening or Chosen, which is included, like I said, as a backup in this issue. And so he has, for me, he did one for me. It's me, my arms draped around the leg of the security officer, Goltok, this tough horn sort of Klingon style security officer, and I'm just like in complete love with her, both as a character and apparently in the sketch. So there's sketches for that, and then the final tiers we're selling his original art. So we're selling pages that he did the art of. So if you want original comic page art hanging on your wall in a Star Trek-ish sort of thing, then that's your tier.
Yeah, I'm looking at it right now, and I see the one that you're referring to, and I'm like, where is his hand supposed to be on here?
That's a good question.
Crotch. It doesn't look like it's wrapped around.
I know it's not like quite at the ankles. It's I didn't notice that the first time it got pointed out to me. I was like, yeah, all right. Perhaps if you wish to have your hand in a specific place, you could certainly specify it, and I'm sure he would be more than accommodating to. Yeah.
All right. Well, again, I want to thank the writer and creator of the comic Awakening, Ari Gross, here for joining us here today to promote the comics Kickstarter currently running into February 26th, right? It's when it ends, I believe.
That's right. February 25th plus 50 minutes or something like that. So February 25th is the last day.
Okay. All of Ari's socials and website will be listed in this episode's details alongside Awakening's Kickstarter for those who are interested in the comic and all of the rewards, and all the tiers that he just listed a few seconds ago. Again, I'm KS Garner, and you've been listening to the Solo Nerd Bird Podcast. Thank you.